What's up everyone? In today's video we will explore the autonomic nervous system so that we can better understand the components influencing your ability to get activated and or to get relaxed. And so what is the autonomic nervous system? Well, your autonomic nervous system is the part of your nervous system that controls involuntary actions, including heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, digestion, and sexual arousal. And notice I mentioned respiration in there, or breathing. So what you will soon realize is that breathing can be activated both by involuntary actions, which is probably 90-95% of the time, and voluntarily actions, something that we'll discuss further down the road. So you can actually control your respiration or your breathing either involuntary or voluntarily, depending on your choice. So I'd like to bring your attention to two divisions of the autonomic nervous system. We have the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. And so these two systems counterbalance each other. So this is what we need to know or understand about them. So it can be kind of difficult to remember which system does what. So I'll try to give you a brief overview of both. So first we have the sympathetic nervous system. So its primary function is to stimulate your fight or flight response. So when you're in danger or perceived danger, this is the system that kicks in to allow you to either fight or to flee the situation. So basically it's getting us ready to act, react, and perform to meet the demands that life throws at us or that poker throws at us. So what that means is, what that looks like actually is an increase in heart rate, an increase in energy going to the muscles, an increase in adrenaline in the body. So this is the type of things that you can expect when your sympathetic nervous system kicks in. And so in that situation, all your body functions mobilize themselves to act or react. And so you're in a state of high awareness and high attention. So you can probably already imagine situations in poker where that becomes useful or relevant. So think about playing a final table, for example. You want to be alert and focused, but also not too much so that it impairs your decision-making ability. So you don't want to be too much activated as well. You just want to have this sweet spot where you're focused, you're alert, but not that it becomes overwhelming. And so what we can understand is that it can be very useful to have your sympathetic nervous system kick in up to a certain point where the activation level can become detrimental to your performance. So here what I'm referencing to is the inverted U stress curve, which I'll show later actually. And so if you end up in a prolonged state of sympathetic activation, this can also have some drawbacks. So because it requires a lot of energy to stay in that state of alertness, and so that can be quite draining on the long run. And so that's where energy management and your ability to move from the sympathetic nervous system to the parasympathetic nervous system, that's when it becomes relevant or interesting. Your ability to move between these two nervous systems. And so we've spoken about sympathetic nervous system here. So now let's talk about what counterbalances the sympathetic nervous system, and that's the parasympathetic nervous system. So here, its primary function is to stimulate what is called the rest and digest response. So it's what allows you to power down and recover. And to simplify it, you can take everything I've said about the sympathetic nervous system and look at the opposite response. So the increased heart rate, energy to muscles, and adrenaline to the body. It's basically decreased heart rate, decreased energy consumption, or you could also say energy going to the digestive system and acetylcholine in the body instead of adrenaline. So you can see here the main difference, which are basically two opposite systems that will either help you fight or flight or bring you in a state of rest and digest, or let's say a state of a relaxed state, for example. And so when you're not in danger or perceived danger, this system sends signals to your body that you can relax, that you can go back to the maintenance of your bodily functions like digestion, activating the metabolism, or helping your body relax in general. So decreased heart rate, like I said, decreased energy consumption, and the projection of acetylcholine. And the parasympathetic activity is said to be the dominant arm of the autonomic nervous system. So what that says is that typically your parasympathetic nervous system is providing what's called a homeostatic level or level of control over the heart rate under resting conditions. So the parasympathetic nervous system, this is kind of the normal state of rest that we tend to be most of the time. And when we need to perform, when there's danger, when there's things to pay attention to, that's when we get into the sympathetic nervous system. Some people have this sympathetic nervous system always activated, and that can create some disease in the long term. So this is the things that I wanted you to know or understand first before we go into something deeper in the next video. So when in the parasympathetic nervous system, typically your sympathetic activity is minimal or absent, which means in healthy humans, which means that you're just in this state of homeostasis, of balance, of rest and recuperation. And so if we try to think about when you want to perform at your best, you probably need a mix of both systems. So let me try to paint a picture here. So when you start your session, all your tables have starting stacks. You want to be focused, but also remain somewhat calm, right? So you have so many tables, you don't want to spend all your energy focusing on one table, for example. So you're in that parasympathetic nervous system probably, and your sympathetic nervous system is probably not activated that much. Because if you were already in a fight or flight mode as you start your session, what would probably happen is you would end up running out of energy before the end of your session, because it's very demanding to be in the sympathetic nervous system. So it's all about managing the intensity of activation of those systems. So which system is activated, how much is it activated, and trying to manage that throughout your performance, so throughout your session. And it's also up to your preference. But I'd say, like in terms of how activated you want to feel when you play, but I'd say that typically when you start a session, you would be closer to a parasympathetic state. So everything is under control, things are good, you are relaxed. And when the state increases, so maybe as you get deeper in the tournament, as you approach a final table, so that's when your sympathetic nervous system might start to kick in, and you might get more activated, feeling your heartbeat increasing, maybe your heart's breathing, you're breathing faster. And so your objective in that situation is to manage this activation to be in your optimal zone of performance. Not too high, not too activated, and not too low, not too relaxed. So you need to be able to shift your activation state in that situation using tools like breathing. So you can really see here how typically you'd spend most of your time here, and in occasions you'll need this system to help you get more activated, pay more attention, be more focused. But typically you'll come back, or you should come back to that state after a certain period. So for some examples, like I know I've watched Jordan stream sometimes, and his heart rate might go from 80 beats per minute to something like 115, 120. So that's going basically exactly from this parasympathetic nervous system with a decreased heart rate. So between 70 and 80, and then going up to 115, 120 when this important decision comes in. And as soon as the decision is taken, typically you'd come back to your parasympathetic nervous system, so your normal state of performance, so a relaxed, alert, but still focused state. So hopefully that kind of clarifies or makes sense for you. And for the people that are more visual than auditive, I wanted to give kind of an example of what it looks like, or the discrepancies between parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. So this is what it looks like. So on the left side, if you remember, parasympathetic, that's the rest and digest response system. And on your right, you have the sympathetic, so the fight or flight response system. And so on one end, you have what's called the maintenance of homeostasis, so the state of balance. And on the other end, here we have what's called the mobilizing of reserves under stress, under high pressure situation. So if we look at a couple of those body function that I've mentioned, so here the pupil is constricted, whereas here the pupil is dilated. So you're trying to get as much information about what's going on near you. The saliva is not necessarily relevant, but constricts of the bronchi versus relaxes bronchi. So what makes sense here is, as there's danger, you want to expand the availability of air in your lungs. So that makes sense that your bronchi are more relaxed in that state. Like I've mentioned, on one end where you're rest and digest, you have a slower heart rate, and on the other side you have an increased heartbeat or heart rate. As you can look here, the stimulation of something like bile or the digestion. So on one end we're available for digestion, whereas on the other end we need the blood or the energy in our muscles. So we see how it slows down the digestion, reduces the intestinal muscles. So everything to keep you in your fight or flight mode, and you see something like the adrenaline production kicking in to help you with that fight or flight response. So you can really see the difference between these two systems. And maybe to help you differentiate the two, like the only tip that I have about the names is to think about the sympathetic nervous system as a system that is helpful, that is friendly in challenging situations. So you could almost say it's sympathetic to your situation. So it's friendly, it's helpful. And on the other hand, for the parasympathetic nervous system, there's not much we can do other than understanding that para means alongside something, so alongside the sympathetic nervous system. So if you remember what the sympathetic nervous system is, something that helps you fight or flight, then you can remember that the parasympathetic one is the one coming alongside the fight or flight response system. So that's the best I could do in terms of giving you a trick to remember both. I wish I could do better, but I feel like the people behind naming those systems were not didn't think about how to make it user friendly here. So rest and digest one last time, and fight or flight. There you go. And so remember just earlier how I've spoken about this analogy that too much stress can become overwhelming. So here we have what's called the inverted U model for stress. So it's basically looking at your performance levels based on your arousal or stress arousal levels. So basically stress arousal level, that's basically talking about your activation level. So that's your sympathetic nervous system. And so if we look at this graph, the higher the stress level, the better you perform until a certain point, where too much stress becomes overwhelming. You see those words as you go down, too much stress, exhaustion, breaking down, so your performance is decreasing. And so the reason why you reach exhaustion or breaking down, and that's your body in a heightened state of sympathetic activation. So there's a point where the state of activation is no longer sustainable, hence the importance to be able to manage your activation level. I also wanted to mention how a certain amount of stress is good. It actually helps us perform. So you see here, this phase, we're talking about something that could be good stress. That stress is good. It helps us perform until a point where it becomes detrimental. So that's the distress part here. And so you might have heard of words like eustress. That's the good stress part, eustress. And then you have distress right here. That's your bad stress when it becomes detrimental to your performance. So a certain amount of stress is good. You're trying to reach a level of stress arousal, a level of activation where you feel like you're in your comfort zone. So if you're overactivated, we're going to learn how to use breathing to relax yourself. And if you're in this state where you're not aroused enough, we're going to learn ways to use breathing as well to actually get you activated to this point here. So that's what's interesting, and one of the takeaway. You can use something like breathing to actually control your heart rate, which will inevitably influence how you perceive the situation. So the higher your heart rate, the more you might feel stressed or challenged, which is a good thing up to a certain point. So if I wanted to try to give you a quick summary, we have two systems that work in opposite direction. So you want to activate one or the other based on your desired activation level. If you want to feel more relaxed, you will try to activate your parasympathetic nervous system. If you're looking to feel more activated, you will look at ways to activate your sympathetic nervous system. And the end goal is to figure out your comfort zone level and manage your activation level accordingly. So your end goal when you perform is to figure out what's your comfort zone level, what's your level of activation, and then you manage your activation level accordingly. If you get too high, you'll need to calm yourself. If you feel too low, you'll need to activate your sympathetic nervous system. And so here, that's it for this video. In the next video, we will look at how breathing can be helpful or can help you reach your desired activation level. So until then, take care, everyone.